Well, hey everybody, it is Romania Black, and we're on episode 7 of the Apothecary Diaries. I had to watch ahead. I'm so sorry. I did get to check comments. We're going to talk about them in a second, but I did have to watch ahead because the last episode, I thought it was going to be a two-parter, and it kind of was, but then we still don't know about the fireworks and what's going on with those, so we need answers. I have a feeling that this episode is going to give us those answers. We just have to, watch the episode and find out, right? But I've got some comments I want to talk about, and I've been reading The Last Eunuch of China, which has been really interesting, and there's some things in there that I kind of want to touch base on as we go into this story. But a couple things I want to note. Scarlet Knight O talked about how MaoMao might be based on Murasaki Shikibu, which I didn't get too into depth with researching because I didn't want like something about her past like cropping up and it be a spoiler. So I was like, oh, that's cool. But maybe once we get way down past season 1, we can look more into it. I Swallow Apple Seeds pointed out that the music composer of this series is also the music composer of Beastars, which is really cool. I've watched season 1 of Beastars on my own. I know that they're finishing up. They have a season 2, and I know season 3 is like the last season and it's coming out. So that might be something to watch down the road. Who knows? And then Anime Annie talked about this part that's a little bit consequential, and I kind of agree with Anime Annie. It does kind of make me a little bit like ooh, and like make the bottom of your stomach drop out. Is that once a concubine technically gets with the emperor, by historical standards of ancient China, once that happened, she couldn't be gifted to the other military men because she was no longer this unspoiled virgin. So basically, if Fuyo in episode 3 had actually been, gotten with the emperor, then she would not have been able to have had the fairy tale happy ending that she ends up getting, which is really sad. And I think it's important to note that this series definitely does not. It's kind of weird. The series in some ways is very real and very much like, yeah, this stuff is happening. But I think that, it shows that despite how romanticized some of this is, it's still very, very serious. And I feel like with Gyokuyou, she probably has the most kind of harrowing. It's why she seems so disdainful when she looks out the window and kind of melancholy, because she knows she's been with the emperor. She's had his child. She can never have that ending that Fuyao had in this episode. She just has to accept that she could possibly be the emperor's wife and make the most of it because she doesn't have a choice. It's that, or she just, go to a convent or just be passed on, but she can never go and have, if she had a childhood friend back home that she was in love with, that ain't ever gonna happen. And it's kind of sad. It's like, ooh, there's beneath that surface, there's a harsh truth that these women have to face. And it's like, And MaoMao seems very, as she told Jinshi, she's like, this is just how it is. And it sucks. And Jinshi's like, well, that's awful. And she's like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Like, what can you do about it? It's like, this is the hand that fate has dealt you. What can we do? So I thought that was really interesting. In The Last Eunuch of China, the chapters, I'm slowly but surely getting through the book. This last part that I read was really interesting. A lot of it was talking about our last eunuch of China, Sun Yao Ting, has moved. Apparently he was at this, the uncle of the emperor's house, and he kind of realized that was going nowhere. He wasn't making any money. So as fate would have it, they reinstated the abdicated emperor. And it's like, okay, the Republic reinstated him. It's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit about the British monarchy. Like, he's there. There's still, the Republic has more hands in the political sphere, but the emperor is kind of reinstated as a figurehead. And it goes into a lot more detail in the book, but I'm not going to waste your time. And Sun Yao Ting gets a ride to the Imperial Palace to try his hand and see what's going to happen. So basically what ends up happening is he gets to the Imperial Palace and he gets a job right away working for a man that sells opium to the attendants in the palace. He basically is like a drug dealer inside the Imperial Palace, and Sun Yao Ting can read, and the man that's kind of like the apothecary there cannot. And so he hires the eunuch Sun Yao-ting to help like write stuff out for him and to like leave notes and stuff because he's illiterate, and Sun Yao-ting can do it for him. It's interesting to note that they make note that in the Imperial Palace, the eunuchs were not allowed to have opiates. They were not allowed to have opium. They were just to basically give them to others that purchased them, but they were not allowed to partake themselves, which they had their balls and penis chopped off. You think they'd probably want an opiate to kind of alleviate the pain, but it's a terrible joke. It had already passed at that point. However, from that, the apothecary that Sun Yao-ting works for, he eventually is like, hey, there's this guy. He's kind of the second highest eunuch in the entire palace. You could work for him. And Sun Yao-ting is like, oh, of course. It ends up being that the second highest eunuch, he's paralyzed from the waist down. And basically, because he's been there so long, he kind of has seniority and everyone respects him, but he can't do anything. He has to sit in bed all day. So Sun Yao-ting gets in charge of like cleaning his bedpans, helping get him food and everything. And he has a bad temper. And I really liked the moment that he met him. His name was Rin. And he says, he's like, Rin is known for his fiery temper. He'll scream and yell at you. Can you take it? And Sun Yao-ting replies tactfully, well, if I make a mistake, I deserve to be blamed. But what if I do nothing wrong? And Rin's like, he'll do. And I was like, oh! So it's really cool. He develops this friendship with Rin. He does all of this work taking care of him. And as luck would have it, ends up that the dowager who is known as, where's her name in here? I'm going to talk about her in here in just a second. The High Consort Duan Kong. She ends up wanting all these theatrical performances performed. Sun Yao-ting learned how to do somersaults and gymnastics from his previous master. And so he gets into the theater troupe to work for her. And it kind of becomes this big thing. And he talks about how a lot of eunuchs who could perform and do these tricks and could be quirky, they could kind of rise up the ranks of the eunuchs because it made them stand out and they were entertainers. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of Jinshi, because Jinshi's beautiful, but he also seems very talented. So maybe that's part of rising through the ranks. Duan Kong, she's very interesting because we've been talking these last couple episodes about all the consorts and the concubines. And Duan Kong, she's fascinating to me. She was a concubine who entered the Forbidden City when she was, how old was she? She was 16 years old when she, let's see here, she was born in 1873, and she was basically, let me get this right, she was 16. She was 16 when she entered the Forbidden City under the name Concubine Jin, and she came with her sister, Concubine Zin. So these two sisters basically came into the Imperial City as concubines to the Emperor, and part of their dowry was possibly the most bitchin' sculpture. I want this cabbage sculpture. It's one of the most prized possessions in this Chinese museum. It was part of their dowry. It is this amazing cabbage sculpture. I love it. It is made from jade. It is made from jade and has like a locust in it along with some other detailed ornate designs. What does it say here? Yes, this cabbage with insects is jadeite carved in the shape of a Chinese cabbage head with a locust and a katydid camouflaged in the leaves. And it's part of the National Palace Museum in Taipei, Taiwan. Yeah, I want it. Of course, it's like one of the most valuable pieces of antiquated art, but it's so freaking cute. I need it. But yeah, so that was part of their dowry. But anyway, what ends up happening is that they both move into the palace, and it appears as if Jin's younger sister, Zin, was discovered to have abused her influence over the emperor by interfering with civil appointments. And Jin was implicated, and they both were demoted by the Empress Dowager Shishi at the time. And the Dowager ordered the execution of a palace eunuch who had collaborated with them. So this is a big old ordeal, right? And so the two sisters, after somebody was, I think a consort was banished from Beijing, several years later they were restored to their positions, but Jin, the younger sister, was placed under house arrest. So all this stuff goes on. And the emperor ends up dying along with the Dowager Shishi, who dies one day after him. And then the new emperor Puyi is abdicated like a few years later. It's this big ordeal. Long story short, the Dowager Zhuangkong, she comes back into power and is kind of one of the most highest ranking political affiliates in the palace at the time, even though she's basically the stepmom of Puyi, who's the emperor now. And it's this very interesting relationship. So in this story, Sun Yaoting, our eunuch, gets to know her, and he makes note that she's not very pretty, which I think is hilarious. He's like, I don't know why the emperor was with her. And I'm like, but she kind of has all this political prowess, right? So it's kind of scandalous. Where I'm at in the book now is that the high consort, the woman who's kind of like the aunt here, who reminds me a lot of the whole situation with Li Shu and Aduo. So that whole situation reminded me of this. Basically, the emperor's mom gets in a fight with her, and the doweress, she's like, well, your son is doing all this, blah, blah, blah. You'll have to read the book. There's a lot going on. But the mom ends up like committing suicide and like overdoses on opioids after this argument. And it's a thing. And it's just a big thing. It is insane. So there's all the tea getting spilled about the Chinese imperial family, all the tea going down. It's interesting, but the story establishes just kind of how much power. When I started this series, I felt, obviously I still feel bad for these concubines because of the situation that they're in, but this book is making me realize that these women, despite their circumstances, could get to a place where they held quite a bit of power, which I think is interesting. And the Dowager, for example, she's not even, her husband's the former emperor who's dead, but she's like one of the highest ranking political people in the entire palace and with the Republic. So it's fascinating to see how these women kind of rose up through the ranks. And so again, we have these 4 concubines who are trying to vie for power, and it just makes it all the more interesting to see, like, well, who's going to get the power? Who's it going to go to? What will that mean for them? It's very interesting. And I want that damn cabbage jade statue, please and thank you. I'm not asking for much. Anyway, we've talked for way too long. And we need to get down to business, right? Right. I think so. Real quick, I want to give a shout out. I know I've wasted all your time, but I want to give a quick shout out to our philanthropy tier over to Patreon to thank them so much for their support this month. I'm super thankful for all of my patrons, no matter what tier you all are supporting me from, and from all the subscribers on YouTube, but a special shout out to the philanthropy tier over on Patreon. You all are amazing. So Alex Cornejo, Anime Annie, Be Happy, who is also the moderator of this series, thank you, as well as Bryant Reed, as well as Dana, Danny Don Mai, Daverin, Destiny Marie, Danger Zone, Damage 3245, as well as No Nickname, as well as Ichu, Eric, Ghostly Turnip, Fisho, El Freya, Lyndon, Matthew Palfinier, Murphy, Nameless Monster, Nicholas, Sunspots, Trails, Translucent Men, and Shimoyama. Thank you all so much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. Anyway, I'm super excited. I'm ready to go. Ready to see what we get. But we're not going to waste any more time. I've talked for over 13 minutes. So we're going to dive into episode 7 of the Apothecary Diaries. And we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's do it to it. I should put on some clown makeup at this point, shouldn't I? I was really thinking that we were gonna get resolution to this dang firework thing, but nope! Not at all. Hell, next week's episode 8, which is the rule of 8, of course, but I don't know if this series was originally 2 cours or just one continuous 24 episodes. I'm not sure. I would not mind knowing that, if you all know, if it was originally like a 12 episode cour and a 12 episode cour and there was just like a week or 2 in between, but this came out in November, so I don't know, or if it was It makes me think like maybe it was 2 cours. Like we had the first, because if this came out in November and it's episode 7, then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That means episode 12 probably would have came out around Christmas time, and then they have Golden Week. So that could have been like 1 cour get done, and then they start the 2nd cour of season 1 right at New Year's. That could very well be, because at this point, what my thoughts are is that she's gone on this 3-day homecoming to go back home, which is so exciting. We're going to talk about it. But I feel like she's going to like be there for a couple days, and then we're going to have an episode. Maybe episode 8 is going to be like all the stuff going on at her hometown, what she's going to do. Maybe she'll go to the brothel, talk to the 3 princesses, which we'll talk about, and with our gentleman officer, who we need to talk about, because I definitely maybe misunderstood some things last episode, and I'm already dreading what comments I probably got that the moderators were like, don't read, but it's fine. I'm probably going to put a note on episode 6 to make note of it so people don't comment about it, just so y'all know. But yeah, so I'm guessing that she'll probably spend episode 8 hanging out there at the village, and then maybe part of episode 9, and then she comes back at end of episode 9, back to the Imperial Palace, back to the Rear Palace, and then we have 10, 11, 12, which could be episode 10 could possibly be solving the mystery of the fireworks and the poison situation, but they're kind of establishing that this inside job is maybe a little bit bigger than what we originally thought, because originally it was like, oh, we're trying to find who's smuggling possible poisons with the fireworks into the castle, and now it's like somebody's trying to poison Li Shu, and now it's like, okay, these things could all be connected, and they could be one bigger thing, and now we got to figure it out. So basically, that whole tangent is to say that I think that by the time we hit episode 12, 11 or 12, then we'll find out the whole mystery will unravel from there. And I think this storyline is going to take us to the midway point of the season, which is fine. I'm cool with that. It's just really interesting. So yeah, and if these are based on light novels, then that could entail an entire novel in itself. So the first 12 episodes. So we'll see. We'll see. I could be wrong. I'm open to being wrong. and I want the show to see what it's going to give me. But okay. So we start out with her remembering her father, taking her with him. Now, is this her biological father? Maybe, but I don't think so. So let's put up MaoMao here. Here's my theory about MaoMao at this point. I feel like MaoMao, her mother, was possibly a courtesan or a concubine who desired to go to the palace and either died or did not get that chance, right? Because her father saying at the end, being like, what a twist of fate that you, MaoMao, you end up in the Rear Palace, meaning that I don't think her mother made it. I think maybe her mother's desire was to go to the Rear Palace because that's where you make your money, or that's where you could be the emperor's concubine and make your money, but I don't think that that's what ended up happening. And I think that her father just took her in. He seems like an old bachelor that just took her in, and because she could help him there on the farm and because he loved her, right? And again, anime loves to do found family, and I'm in a big support of found family. So if that's the case, she clearly views him, regardless of biologically if she is his or not, she views him as her father, and that's all that matters. So, but I think that could be the case. The only thing I don't really want to happen is MaoMao end up being like the secret relative of the emperor, or like a dignitary's daughter or something like that. I don't want it to be like this, like the Chosen One narrative where, oh my gosh, she's a secret princess or something like that. Like, I don't want this to turn into Princess Diaries. Basically, I like the idea of MaoMao being an ordinary girl who's smart and resourceful and rises up through the ranks using her wit, rather than it turn out that she's, oh my gosh, she's a dignitary daughter or the cousin of the emperor, and that's why we should. No, I don't want that. That's been done many, many times before. We've seen it. We've seen all that jazz. Nobody wants that. No. Instead, I think it would be interesting if her mother had aspired to be a concubine, because as this book, which I've placed it over here now, as this book is pointing out, a lot of people wanted to go work in the Imperial Palace. It was hard. You could die, but the other options were poverty, where you could also die, as we'll talk about when she's going through the city. So if you came from an impoverished place, going to the imperial palace, whether you were a eunuch or a courtesan or a concubine, that was the way to go. That was your meal ticket, because that was where the power was and the money was. And then if you were good, you could take that money and bring it back to your families. That's something the book kind of points out. It's like all these eunuchs, when you question why would they do that to themselves, a lot of them were from families that were just dying, literally dying of starvation. And they couldn't get enough money to pay the bills. And so these men were like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sacrifice for my family and go to the imperial palace in the hopes that I can rise up through the ranks, make some money, and bring it back and keep you all fed. Like, it was really a sacrifice. And so obviously we've seen from Gyokuyou, kind of what that sacrifice means. It means giving up your childhood love. It means giving up your freedoms in a lot of sense to gain different freedoms. And so I very much think that MaoMao's mother could have been, an aspiring courtesan or concubine. I mean, MaoMao's pretty. She's very beautiful. So there's a good chance that her mom was very pretty too. And I wonder if, she kind of succumbed to the dark side of things, and MaoMao knows all about that dark side. But she's also still drawn. I mean, it would make sense too why MaoMao has like ties to this very upscale brothel, as we find out. At first, that was the thing. That was okay. Thing number one was I got that she had friends that were in the brothel and that she visited the courtesans all the time, but I thought it was just because she was studying medicine and she was resourceful. But if her mother was a courtesan, possibly, we don't know if I'm just being hypothetical here. We'll find out, I'm sure, as the series goes on. But if her mother was a courtesan, it would make sense why the other courtesans kind of all take her in and surround themselves with her and like are really nice to her, because they're like, oh, we knew your mom. And same with Grams. Grams is like, I knew your mom, knew you kid, knew where you come from. And so that kind of, she has friends in high places from that. Because when the episode started, I was like, when the series started necessarily, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, her dad doesn't look like somebody that frequents a brothel. He just doesn't appear that way. He doesn't look like a guy, based on what we've seen from the rest of the series, he doesn't look like a guy that frequents there. And then we never really see him go and visit the brothel again. So I'm like, well, what's his ties to it? Well, he could have just adopted MaoMao so that she had a place to stay and a mouth to feed and wasn't, growing up in the brothels, So I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, so then we have MaoMao. Oh, she's so pretty with her hair down. I really like that. I like the little animation of her just sitting up and just being like, boop. She's just there. But the other girls, the other maids, the ladies in waiting, they all feel like she needs to sleep. They're like, you ingested poison. Like, the head minister is still like on his bed nearly dying. How are you okay? And MaoMao's like, well, I've experimented with poison. I'm kind of got a tolerance to it. And they're like, nope, go to bed. And they send her to go up there to sleep. But she still has the bandage on. And for a second, she thinks of going without the makeup. But then she changes her mind and is like, no, I kind of still like it. So 10 months have passed since she got to the palace, which makes sense of why little Li-Ling is growing up so fast. She's already 10 months old, so she's aging quickly. So time is passing very quickly in this series. Like, we're 7 episodes in and it's been 10 months. Okay. So I like that Gyokuyou, she doesn't judge MaoMao for keeping the freckles on. She gets that MaoMao's like, I've always had them, so now I feel uncomfortable not having them. Can I just keep them? And Gyokuyou, 1, is like, I get it. Sure, you do you, girl. But 2, Gyokuyou also doesn't want any other people flirting with her. so she's like, no, keep that makeup on, girl. If that helps, sure thing. But she's like, Gaoshun's been here the whole time. And I'm like, Jinshi is our beautiful, beloved peacock. He is rainbows galore. He is a beloved peacock. We love him. But Gaoshun is husbando material. He has a deep voice. He does the chores for you. He's kind. He's considerate. He's a gentleman. He is husbando material. And Jinshi, I'm like, you need to be taking lessons, son. But that's not it. We're going to talk about Jinshi and Gaoshun because they have history, apparently. They've known each other a while, apparently. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, we're going to make notes of that. But yeah, so Gaoshun's been over there trying to see her. She's like, oh, he seemed bored, so I asked him to pull up some weeds. She's like, oh, ha, 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 ha. She very much did the, not Regina from Oron High School Host Club, or, it's not Regan. I can't think of her name right now, but she's like, oh, ha, ha, ha. Like, rises up in a spiral from Oron High School. Gyokuyou was kind of like that today. She was stirring the pot. So, MaoMao makes the note that at the garden party, he was in a pretty high-ranking seating. So Gaoshun's pretty high-ranked. Make note of that. The Gaoshun is high-ranked. Okay. And he was there in the military, it seems, possibly. But he was high-ranked. But even then, it's like the highest-ranked eunuch is still below any consort. Like, in the book, it's pretty much like even the highest ranking official, the consort pretty much could tell them whatever they wanted to do, and they have to do it. It's like, that's why the Dowagist is pretty high up there. So she's like, he must win the hearts of ladies in waiting in his own way. I mean, yeah, he's a very sweet guy. And she's like, let me use the parlor. And they're like, is it me or is Hong Myung being sparkly-eyed too? Like, they're all sparkly-eyed around old Gaoshun, right? So then Jinshi brings her the soup that was poisoned. This was the soup that Lady Gyokuyou was supposed to drink. And so let's make a little chart about this. So we have MaoMao, who was the taster of the soup. And this is the soup that is poisoned. That soup was supposed to go over here to Gyokuyou. But that didn't happen because we detected the poison right off the bat. My little skull and crossbones. So we got that taken care of. So that was the soup that she was supposed to drink, and it was poisoned. And he's like, yes. And she's like, well, how kind of him to send me the soup. But, and I like that Gaoshun's like, do not eat it. I like that Gaoshun immediately is like, don't drink the poison, please. I know you want to. Jinshi's probably told him all about it. But he's like, please don't drink the poison. You really don't need to. And she's like, oh, I won't. But then it's not because Gaoshun said so. It's because the silver's corroded and it's no longer tasty. And Gaoshun's like, really? You're not doing it because I told you that was a bad idea, but because it wouldn't taste good? Really? He's like, oh, nice. He's like, oh, really? Tasty? That's what we're worried about. So she asked him if he picked it up, and he says no. And then she basically dusts for fingerprints, which I thought was really, really cool. So I thought maybe she would have them all like take paint or something and like put their hand down and they could just check for fingerprints that way. But the human fingerprint is so intricate, even though they're all different, it would be really, really hard to maybe compare and match those. And we ain't got CSI technology, so that's not going to work. So she's like, instead we got to figure out, who touched what. Luckily it's on silver. And she makes a good point there. If you've had anything that's like real silver, the moment you touch it, it gets smudges. That's why my great-grandmother had like a silver cup and she always like tarnished it and she always like cleaned it and polished it because it was always like the moment you touched it, it was grimy. I'm like, I ain't that bougie, so I don't have to worry about having silver plates or anything. But that's why you have to wipe the silver. So Gaoshun, I want to see Gaoshun without his hat. Does Gaoshun have long hair? Does he have beautiful long locks of hair, or is it all cut short? Is Jinshi the only one allowed to have pretty locks of hair? I don't know. I want to see Gaoshun without his hat. We haven't seen him without his hat, damn it. If they do a flashback, we might see it. But he's like, so there's been people who've touched the bowl. She's like, the size and placement of the fingers allow us to guess how they held it. And she's like, and the way this bowl was held, and that's when she realizes it wasn't necessarily the servant that poisoned the bowl. She's like, shit, it was somebody else. And Gaoshun's like, come on. She's like, it was held by 4 people, I think. And he's like, 4 people? And she's like, yes, 3 people who touched the side of the bowl and 1 who touched the top of it. So we have basically the bowl with the soup came from the person who poured it. So they held it at the bottom, presumably. Then we had the person who carried it, and they held it from the bottom as well. So we got them. Then we had the taster, Li Shu's taster, who held it, but there was one more. So then we had the taster, but there's also a fourth mystery person that held it from the top, and they are the one that poisoned the soup. They are the ones that poisoned it. We got a Lady Olenna in the middle of all this trying to poison Li Shu. Right? There was one more. An outsider that touched the rim of the bowl. And this person, this unknown person, is the one that poisoned the food. And he's like, well, why is the taster's finger mark on the high-rank concubine's bowl? And he's like, well, that's simple, because Lady Li Shu's taster swapped it on purpose as a form of harassment. No, not knowing that it was poison. Yeah, so basically what happened was the bowl of soup, and along with the salad that had the seafood in it, that was... Now, the thing was, MaoMao got onto her last week, the taster, because they swapped with the food that Li Shu was allergic to. Not realizing that that could have secretly poisoned her as well. That's the problem. The thing is that the taster and the taster and the three women that touched the bowl on the bottom, they didn't realize that there was poison in it, but they switched it out, Li Shu and Gyokuyou's food, because they swapped it as a joke so that Li Shu could get the food that would give her an allergic reaction, not knowing that that could potentially poison her. They just thought she didn't like it, and they were just doing it to be spiteful. But the reality is that it could have ended up poisoning one of the high consorts, and then the poison could have killed Li Shu too if she'd ate it. So yeah, it's getting a little bit more complicated, right? But I don't think the taster and them realized while they were bullying that it was poison. And that's when Gao Shun's like, now wait a minute, a lady in waiting bullying a high-ranking concubine. Ladies in waiting, they're pretty expendable. And he's like, can you explain? And she's like, okay, look, I'm just speculating, so don't take me seriously. But then she talks about how the women, and it makes sense now, because I commented in the last episode, I'm like, why are they all dressed in white when she's dressed in pink? Well, because they didn't think Li Shu would notice, and they wanted to make her stand out in a bad way. Like, whenever Gyokuyou goes to the party, all the ladies in waiting are dressed in similar colors, so there's solidarity. They stand there, they all look matching. But when Li Shu goes and is in this big clashing pink color, the other maids didn't dress up like her because they didn't want to be associated with her. So basically, Li Shu is being bullied by her own handmaids in waiting. And I think the reason for that is because, one, they're probably jealous that this girl is younger than them but has more authority than them. But two, they don't take her seriously because she's this 14-year-old that's the mother-in-law of her now betrothed emperor who's twice her age. So they don't take her seriously at all, which makes me feel a little bit bad for Li Shu. I mean, I felt bad for her before because she was literally 9 years old when she became a concubine, but I feel bad for her now because nobody takes her seriously, and it seems like they're trying to do her harm. Now, whether or not, now we had the different women here, so if one of the four is the one that poisoned the soup, then it's going to be a big problem, right? Because it not only could have killed Li Shu, it could have killed Gyokuyou as well. So, but we can't know who poisoned the soup yet because we don't have all of the evidence. She's like, come to think of it, on that day, yeah, they were all getting chided at by the other women, and they weren't doing, and Aduo's, lady in waiting were commenting that they weren't doing their job. The only people a concubine can truly trust are her ladies in waiting. And if she can't even, they're like, I suspect ladies in waiting recommended that dress to young lady Li Shu. And if she can't even trust her ladies in waiting, then she really has nobody she can trust in the palace. She didn't realize they'd done it to humiliate her. Yeah, and that kind of sucks for Li Shu because MaoMao's right. The only women that, a lady in waiting, the only women that a concubine can trust are her ladies in waiting. And if she can't trust them, she's kind of all alone. And Now, of course, the question is, has Li Shu been with the emperor or the emperor's dad, you know, like the other concubines, or is she kind of like a Fuyao situation where she could leave if she wanted to? We don't know. We don't know. And they're like, but not only that, she also tried to swap the food to further harass concubine Li Shu. Well, that's what we're suggesting, but they were unaware that it was poisoned when they swapped it. So the swap was just meant to harass her, but they didn't realize it could have also killed another one of the consorts. It ended up saving her. Yeah, because of that taster. Here's the thing, and this is kind of what MaoMao realizes in the moment. She got on to that taster for, you know, almost causing Li Shu to have an allergic reaction. But what she realizes in this moment is the fact that while it is distasteful, she's like, if that taster had tasted the soup, she would have died. And that'd have been that. And it's like, And they're like, why would they do such a thing? And that's what Gyokuyou asks. And it's like, well, she became the emperor's concubine at a young age. Then she left the rear palace. Her situation's unique. A wife must sacrifice everything to devote to her husband. We are all taught that from a very young age. From her perspective, to wed her deceased husband's son is indecency. Yeah, that yeah, that patriarchal structure that you have to devote yourself to your husband no matter what is very ingrained in that history. And to be suddenly, you know, to be 14 years old and having to marry your dead husband's son who's twice your age, it, yeah, seems a bit indecent. No wonder she's made fun of. I feel for her. I feel for Li Shu. She's like, I think the mark near the bowl's edge was left by the person who added the poison because they must have held the edge while stirring it. And he's like, okay. And she says, your fingers must not touch the area that noble lips are supposed to go. That is just a nice general rule in practice. I don't care if it's nobility or if you're at a restaurant. Touching like the top part where your mouth is going to go, no, no, no. Absolutely not. You always grab from the bottom. Like that's common courtesy. Nobody wants your grubby fingers on where their mouth is going to be. So yeah, she's like, that was the first thing. The art that is teaching of Hongmyong. She's like, that's all I got. That's all I came up with. And that's when Gyokuyou asks her and says, can I ask one more thing? And he's like, why did you try to protect the taster yesterday? Like, he's like, you could have. And that makes her, and I love that she hisses at him. She's like, shh. He's like, look, I have to deal with your boyfriend. Just answer the question. Gyokuyou is a saint for having to deal with both MaoMao as well as Jinshi. He is a saint. But she's like, look, she's like, I kind of felt bad. He's like, I'm just curious. He's like, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. And she's like, fine. She's like, the life of a serving girl is worthless compared to that of a concubine. So, especially if the life belongs to a food taster. She's like, that girl already has it bad enough. I didn't feel like making her life worse. See? MaoMao's sweet. And then Gyokuyou's like, okay, I'm going to take my leave now. And she's like, I should be thankful since she did go out of her way to make the swap. She's like, I got to taste the poison, but I didn't get a chance to swallow it. Oh, girl. You're obsessed with getting poisoned. So then, I love this scene with Gyokuyou and Jinshi. This scene is great. He's like, that's all I got. And he's like, you always impress me how you word things. Gyokuyou is very well spoken. So, of course. So then Jinshi's like, well, is that so? And he's like, yeah, this is clearly an inside job, isn't it? He's like, well, it seems that way. It's getting more complicated. And I do like that Jinshi's like, well, you make it sound simple, because no, this is not simple. An inside job inside the palace, it could be anyone, it could be any network of people, and now you have to try and figure out who's responsible inside without letting everyone inside know, because it's a big old rumor mill, and the moment anything gets out, it's going to spread like wildfire. So Jinshi has to try to deduce who's doing this without letting on that he's trying to Sherlock this case. He's like, I've got to try to solve it without letting people know I'm trying to solve it. Otherwise, it will get out like wildfire and my job will be 10 times harder. So yeah, I feel for Jinshi too. He's like, I haven't had time to sleep because of this. I didn't even change my clothes. He's like, I need to stop thinking. And Gyokuyou's like, your natural self is showing. Jinshi puts on a big front. He puts on a big old air of being this very smoldering, poised person, but deep down he's just like, oh, it's like it's so hard, right? With his peacock. He reminds me, if we're talking about Don Mai, he reminds me a little bit of Shin Ching Cho from Scum Villain Self-Saving System, which is maybe why I like Jinshi so much. He reminds me of him quite a bit, which maybe is why I like him so much. And Gao Shun's like, you know, the facade is cracking, your natural self showing, and Jinshi's like, who cares? It's just you here. We know each other. And he's like, well, I'm here. He's like, cut me some slack. And he's like, no. He's like, nothing I say will move you, huh? And he's like, we've had a long relationship. So Gao Shun is pretty determined to keep Jinshi on the track that he's on and to not let his true self show. He seems pretty adamant in doing that, right? And then he says, it's not easy having someone look after you since you were born. So that tells us that Gao Shun has been watching over Jinshi his whole life. Like, so they've been together since they were kids. And I wonder if Jinshi was maybe from a higher ranked family. Was he from a higher ranked family? And Gao Shun was his, like, family servant? Or his own eunuch? Is Jinshi a eunuch? We don't know. Is Jinshi actually a eunuch, or is he in disguise, pretending to be a eunuch? I don't know. We don't know. Is he or is he not? That's a very good question. He doesn't seem to have to, I mean, I assume that he's a eunuch, but we don't know for sure. Right? And he's like, Master Jinshi, you forgot to remove your hairpin. And he's like, oh, I totally forgot. And he's like, it was hidden in your hair. He's like, I don't think anyone noticed your true status. So they talk about the hairpin and that it was hidden, so no one noticed his true status. So I don't know if that means that because they couldn't know, like, is he taken? Is he betrothed or not? Or is he faking it? Jinshi is a mystery right now. We don't know enough about him, and Gao Shun isn't going to tell us anything but cryptic phrases. And he's like, we'll take care of it. And he's like, you're treating it roughly again. It is very pretty. It's something only special individuals can wear, so please take care of it. He's like, I know. He's like, you don't. Gao Shun's like, oh my gosh. He's like, I have to take care of you so much. So Jinshi, because yeah, Gao Shun doesn't have the hairpin either. So I'm very curious about Jinshi and his backstory and what his relationship with Gao Shun is and what the deal is. But everybody's being so cryptic. We're going to have to wait and find out. Of course we are. Interesting. He's like, let's do this. Let's figure this out. So anyway, MaoMao brings her friend some little kebabs, which are awesome. And she's like, oh, did you get any hairpins? And they tell her that, oh, you get to basically exchange it for a day out. And MaoMao's like, wait, what? I thought these were useless, but what can we do with them? So apparently the system is, if you get a hairpin from a gentleman inside the palace, you get to go on a date with them, and you can get to go outside the palace for a certain amount of time and then come back. That is a little difference in the last Eunuch in China book. The eunuchs can save up their money and they can leave and go home for a day or two. They don't have to have a special permission or anything. The thing is, it costs money once you're outside the palace walls to get to places, to buy food, and then you're obviously going home to give some money to your family. That's the whole reason you did this. So they didn't leave often because they just didn't have the money to do so. But it wasn't like this where the girls got the pins and they could leave. So I don't know if the eunuch system was different or if this is just like based on other historical things. I don't know. But the point is that she ends up being like, okay, well, she's like, you can meet men outside of the rear palace, and if you get special permission, they can escort a female worker outside. And you can use the hairpin to ask someone to take you out of the rear palace. And she's like, well, perfect. That'll be great. She's like, thank you, Xiaolan. I'll go give it a try. She's like, I can weasel my way out so I can go see my family. Let's do this. And she's like, oh, no problem. She's so sweet. The hawthorn, that's what the kebab was. Cute. So anyway, MaoMao's like, all right, I've got technically 4 pins. I didn't realize that the necklace she got from Gyokuyou was a hairpin. I thought it was a necklace, but apparently it's a hairpin. Whatevers. But she can't use the one from Gyokuyou, and she can't use the one, she's got 4 hairpins so far, so she can't use one from Gyokuyou. She can't really use the one from Lihua because they're both concubines. Jinshi has no reason to leave, and she's not going to ask Jinshi because she's like, get away from me. So her other option is this gentleman who is our human Labrador. She's like, 2 are from men. Or rather, since one of the 2 has lost his important parts, should I even call him a man? Well, of course you should. She's like, he's like apothecary, and she's like, ugh. Yeah. So I'm going to have to make a note for episode 6, but I thought that Labrador Man was also a eunuch, and that the hairpins were just tokens of affection, right? Seemed legit. But no, Labrador Man is not a eunuch. He's in the military. The military officers were just there at the same time as the eunuchs, and he has all of his parts, presumably. So he's just in the military inside the palace, which is interesting because I'm like, I figured the emperor wouldn't want anybody inside the palace that had their manly bits, because what are the odds that some of the concubines might try to have an affair with them? But maybe they can't get inside the rear palace. Maybe they can't get to where the concubines are if they're in the military. They have to just stay on the outside. And because MaoMao's not a concubine, she can travel in and out. So that's probably why. That explains it. That makes sense, I guess. But anyway, so they're all sitting there training, and Lee Haku is a lady from the rear palace, has come to see him. And he's like, what? He's like, oh, who is this? And then he looks and sees, he's like, did she take the constellation hairpin seriously? I'm like, why were you giving them out to her? And constellation hairpin? Just because you felt bad for her? Dude, you deserve to get... It's like, well, if it's a pretty lady, it'd be a waste. I only gave out 1 hairpin. He's just so I just gave it to her on a whim. He's like, that one. He's like, how should I turn her down? I'm like... I thought you were getting flustered by her, but you don't care about her? Or you think you can't match her freak? Is that it? He really can't match her freak. Jinshi's the only one at this point that I think can match her freak, if we're being honest. But anyway, so he's trying to figure out, well, what do I do? I don't know. I'm like, why'd you give out the hairpins if you didn't want to go on a date with her? What was the point of that? Dude. You deserve to get bamboozled in this. And bamboozled he gets, because she basically is like, I need you to take me outside the gates because you gave me a pin, and it's not my problem that you gave me a pin. I don't blame MaoMao. She's like, you gave me this hairpin. If you didn't want me to go on a date with you, why'd you do it? And she's like, I don't even want to go on a date with you. I want to go home and see my dad. So, but she does not come empty-handed. She's like, yeah, I am quite bold. He's like, a mere lady in waiting is demanding me, a military officer, to vouch for you. And she's like, yeah, because I know friends in high places, bitch. And she's like, I am going to exploit you because you gave me your pin. What else would you want? She's like, could I interest you in a flower viewing session at the Verdigris house? Or Verdigris house. Yeah, flower viewing. But courtesans, they're not always sexual. They do other things. And of course, apparently this house is like the best in town. The top brothel of all brothels. And he's like, really? The high class that could cost a year of my salary. These ladies, they ain't playing for cheap. Was that Missy Elliott's song? Girls, get that cash. Ain't no shame, ladies. Do your thing. Just make sure you're ahead of the game. Yep, that's it. That's pretty much it, right? Work it. So, but yeah. So she's like, Pyrin, Joka, and Mei Mei, the 3 princesses. They're the highest, not even a high rank official could afford. She's like, sorry for wasting your time. I could get you like a private flower session with them, but whatever. I guess you don't want to do that. And then she pulls out, girl is so devious. She pulls out Jinshi and Lihua's hairpins being like, I got these hairpins from these higher ranked people. I could go to them, I guess, since I just was going to you first. I like that when you look at the hairpins, his is the bronze, and then you have Jinshi as the silver medal, and Li Hua as the gold medal. Love, love. And then Gyokuyou is the gold as well. And he's like, who is this girl? How'd you get these high class hairpins? And it's like, girl has her ways. So he's like, if I don't take her up on this offer, I will never get a chance to see these 3 beautiful princesses ever again. She's like, what's it gonna be? And so then he ends up accepting the offer. Now, MaoMao is only doing this to go see her grandpa, or her dad, who looks like her grandpa. That is it. That's it. But the other ladies in waiting are like, oh my gosh, you got to get out before we did, and you get to go on this date. That's so amazing. You must have met someone nice. And MaoMao's like, thank you? What? And like, why are you so casual? Gyokuyou understands that MaoMao has no idea what the hairpin means. And they're like, how'd you meet him? What's going on? She's like, oh, it's just a coincidence. And then, yeah, the head lady in waiting is like, she has no clue that the hairpin means that they're supposed to be going on a date. And Gyokuyou, she's like, oh, I feel sorry for a certain someone. And she's like, I'm going to stir the pot, because Jinshi like sneezes immediately afterwards. And she's like, oh, this is so amusing. She's like, I get to have my telenovela drama right here, right now. It's going to be great. Like, because she knows that MaoMao's not going on a date with him, but she ain't going to tell Jinshi that. I'm like, and then the lead lady in waiting's like, this is just going to lead to some turmoil, isn't it? So yeah, Jinshi finally shows up, and Gyokuyou's like, oh, well, she's gone on a 3-day homecoming visit. So I love that she's like, she took off with someone. Like, she's so dramatic. She's like, she took off with someone. And of course, Gaoxun's like, oh my god, why? Gaoxun's like, Jinshi is just gonna be depressed for 3 days, and he's got to solve this mystery. He probably was wanting to see MaoMao because she could help him solve the mystery, and now he's gonna be even more depressed and even more stressed out, and I've got to deal with it. It's great. It's fantastic. And then Gyokuyou was like, ah ha ha. So it's interesting that, again, MaoMao grows up in the pleasure district, not far away from the rear palace, which to me also indicates that, like, a lot of women that were high ranked tried to get into the rear palace to be consorts to eventually become empress. So, you know, what's a girl got to lose, right? And she's like, well, the 3 princesses are some of the highest ranked, so just being able to meet them would be an honor. And she gets to see them all the time. So there are girls who enter the brothels wanting to become like them, which felt very Memoirs of a Geisha, right? We see this little girl with the bow hair. But even if they become a serving girl or a courtesan in training, there's no guarantee that they'll get this lifestyle. So then Graham shows up. Grahams reminds me a lot of Gurren from Yona of the Dawn. She's kind of an older woman character who's also a badass. This Grahams reminds me a lot of her. Making poor MaoMao throw up the rest of her poison. Feel like she knows exactly what's been going down, right? And they're like, are you okay? Who is this woman? She's like, she's the overseer of the whole house. And I love that the grandma is like, oh, this young man, he's got a good bone structure and stuff. He looks like he's got a lot of money. They're basically gonna suck him dry, right? Oh my gosh. The capitalism of it all. And so, yeah. She's like, why'd you say that out loud to his face? So they get him to go off. Granted, man has some nice biceps. Got some muscles. And she's like, didn't you read my letter? And she's like, of course I did. She's like, of course I did. That's why I'm taking care of that guy for you. Even though we're introduction only. I'm like, is the grandma, like, trying to get in with MaoMao's father? Is she trying to get in on that? I'm like, grandma, do it. You both look like you're about the same age. You might as well. No, ain't no time like the present. And so MaoMao's like, well, now look, I've got half my pay here from the rear palace early. You know, I could give part of it to, she's like, oh, just go ahead and give it to Perrin. And she's like, this ain't gonna be enough for Perrin. This is like, you know, chump change to her. And she's like, well, I can't control how much money I get. And she's like, fine, I'm just gonna add it to the tab. Bring me more customers. Get more hairpins so you can make me more money. And of course, MaoMao's like, would Jinshi be a good customer? And then she's like, probably not. she's like, should I bring him? He probably wouldn't like it. She's like, no, The courtesans would pull out all the stops and put the brothel out of business. But I'd feel bad for Gaoshan or the quack doctor. She's like, no, they wouldn't really get much out of it, so probably not. And that's when she tells her to go visit her dad. Probably the most poignant part of this whole episode was when she goes back home and she says, cross just one street and the face of the town changes dramatically. And you see rough shacks, beggars, and syphilitic streetwalkers. And that's kind of the double side of it all. Like, the series likes to play with the idea of persona, and we put on a face. Jinshi puts on a face. MaoMao literally puts on a face, but also a cover. And the city itself, the pleasure district, puts on a cover where it looks glamorous. It looks beautiful. It looks like it's the place of dreams. But then you peel back the surface and you see the other side of it, where there are poverty. There is people with disease. There are people that are poor. There are people that are struggling. And there's like this air of desperation that's kind of just beneath the surface of the veneer of the glamour of it all. So I love that. I love that it kind of doesn't shy away from talking about that, which is why, you know, a lot of these women that are courtesans are probably trying to get out of there, because they're like, you either stay on top, or if you fall, you're going to fall hard. So you just got to keep rising up and keep going, or you could face a horrible fate. And so it's really well done. And to me, the fact that she has to walk this street as she goes home, to me, it is, I think, one of the reasons why she probably got into apothecary and into medicine and into trying to test the poisons, because my theory is that her mom probably was poisoned and died, and MaoMao's trying to like make sure that doesn't happen to others. But also seeing these people struggling, it probably encouraged her to keep going about her mission, you know, what she wants to do. I like that she looks at the little moss-covered roof that looks like it needs a lot of maintenance, but she looks at it with nostalgia as she goes in. And her dad just looks up and he's like, oh, well, you were out for a while, for 10 months. And he just accepts it. You know, I think that's one of the things about it. They just accept that it just happened. And he's happy to see her, but he's like, I get why she's so chill. I get why she's so chill, because he's so chill, right? And plus, they'd been getting letters from her, so they knew she was okay. It was just, what can you do? I think my favorite part of this episode, though, is seeing her, like I got a little bit choked up and emotional watching it, because you see her, like, talking to her father and telling him all these stories and explaining what's happened and just, like, going on. And we don't see that side of MaoMao in the palace at all. She's so quiet, and she keeps to herself. And she thinks to herself, but she is not a chatty Cathy in the rear palace. She's very quiet and diligent and just does her business and keeps her head down. But then when she goes home, she just explodes and she blooms and opens up like this flower to him and just tells him all these things. And he just sits there milling, just smiling like, yep, mm-hmm. It's so good. It's so good. And then she just falls asleep there. She's like, I have to go back to the rear palace in 2 days. So she still has time left on her term. She thought her term was 2 years. So she's almost halfway done with her term. Almost. That went by very quickly. So unless stuff happens where she ends up staying, you know. And she's like, I'm sleepy, but I also want a bath. And he's like, well, just go to the house tomorrow and get a bath. I like that she has these beads. I don't know if they have any significance, but they might. She's like, yeah, I'll do that. And then while she's sleeping, he just kind of like looks at her. He says, the rear palace. What a twist of fate. I want to know, but I want the show to tell me. So it's like, what can we do? What can we do? So we get vacation with MaoMao. MaoMao gets to have a vacation to herself at home. Maybe we'll find some more things about her past that comes out. I feel like we're not going to find out about Jinshi until way later in the season. I feel like this can come out way later because he's a mysterious character for a reason, but we'll just have to see. But yeah, so I'm super excited to see what's going to happen in episode 8. 8 is my lucky number, so I'm excited for any time we get to episode 8 in a series. Usually is a fun time, but we'll just have to wait and see. So, in any case, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye!